Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be talking about how to use source control management inside of Visual Studio Code as easily as possible. Before I do anything with the project, I haven't done anything with this. I'm using exactly what I have as my template. I'm going to go ahead and go over to the source control, which my keybind for that is Control-Shift-C. So I'll click on this source control, and I can choose Initialize Repository. So when I click this Initialize Repository, it's going to very quickly change the view a little bit. So now in source control, we can say there's 12 changes here, and these are really just us adding all of the files, which is what this U here is telling us that it's untracked. So it's not accounted for basically. So what we can do is for each file that we know we want to commit, next to it, there's a little stage changes, and we can just go ahead and click that. So I know that I want all of these source files. So I'll click the plus next to all of them. I know I want the make file. All of these VSCode things are going to be important for if I want to actually access the project later. And the same thing goes for the license and these other ones here. So instead of painstakingly going through and choosing all of them, I know I want all of these, and I can hit stage all changes. Now these are added, and when we actually do a commit, these are going to be added to the Git repo. Now, last we need actually to have a commit, which I'm just going to do the initial commit, just adding the project, but I'm just going to go ahead and choose commit. You can see also you can commit and push or commit and sync. We're just going to commit because this is a local repo right now. So when there's no changes, it's going to offer for us to publish the branch so that we can actually put this on GitHub or on some kind of SCM platform. Now, if you have GitHub Desktop installed locally on your machine, then you can also load up GitHub Desktop at this time, and we can add a local repository and actually find that folder. If I go into the history from here, we can see the initial commit, and we can see that all of the files were added. Okay, now we can start making our changes to the project. So the first things first, I'm not going to end up using the second.h and this also mentioned fun1. And that also means that in second.c and second.h, I can actually remove these files completely. Now, when we go back to the source control page, we can see that second.c has been deleted, as well as second.h. So these files are being removed from the project. And in main.c, I removed a couple lines of code. So I removed this second.h, and you can see how that looks visually here. And I also removed this fun1. We can also use an inline view where it shows us the original file, but anything that's been removed is in red. Then we'll see anything that's new in green. Personally, I don't like this so much. I find it, especially when there's changes in the same area, I find it a lot easier to keep track of what's going on. So I don't use the inline view. These little arrows up here will allow us to jump to the next and previous change. So if I press down on the arrow, it's going to focus on this change, and I can press down to jump to the next one. So when you're reviewing all of your changes in a file, this can be a great way to make sure that you're not accidentally skipping anything. And when the file is particularly large, it can help you by preventing you from needing to scroll all the way through the entire file. So anyways, I'm just going to go ahead and clear out all the things that I don't plan on using. Okay, after our quick build to test, I'm going to go ahead and pop into the source control here, and I can check my changes to main C, make sure I didn't accidentally remove anything that I'm going to need. You can see sometimes the diff won't be totally perfect. It knows that I deleted all of this stuff, but because this part is kind of painted red, I don't notice that this persists. I'm not going to suggest that this is the greatest diff tool that there exists, but I think it's certainly acceptable. Considering that it's all built in and very fast, I like it. So I know main.c is definitely going to get checked in, and I know I'm going to want to save the deleted file. But something else that we have here is it's added the main.exe and it's added main.o. Now, we want to ignore all .o files, and we want to ignore all .exe files. If I right-click and say add to gitignore on main.exe and on main.o, I'm going to notice that now we are adding to the .gitignore file, and it's got a decent idea. So it's going to ignore main.exe and object main.o, but I actually want to ignore all .o files and all .exe files, just in case I change what the name of this will be later and when I inevitably add more files. So we can actually go right into the gitignore file, and I just need to replace this with star.o and star.exe. Now you probably could just ignore everything in the object directory, and that would also be a fine choice, but I'm going to leave it specific like this. So I'll go ahead and stage the gitignore change, and now I can update this. I can hit commit here, and of course I can look back on GitHub Desktop and I will see that the new change has arrived as well. Next, I'm just going to throw together a really quick interactive example. Okay, so I just spent a bunch of time building this little ship simulation, ship movement, which was pretty fun. So now if I go to the source control and we actually look at what's changed. So whenever I'm getting ready to make a commit, I always review all of the changes and I review them all manually. So once I've reviewed a file, I want to stage the changes. That way I can keep track of where I left off. Things where I'm clearly just adding a file, so I'm adding a previously untracked file like a resource, I always just immediately check all of those. When I'm looking at new headers, I'm really just making sure that my include guard is there. Once my changes is down to 0 and all my stage changes are in, I like to do one last check of problems to make sure that there's nothing detected in the workspace. Also doesn't hurt to do one last build. Also, be sure to remove any object and exe files just to make sure that you're doing a completely clean build. Okay, everything's looking really good and nothing has changed from the build, so I know that I'm not tracking anything I don't want to be tracking. So I can just add a commit. But before I commit here, I also want to show you that if you are using GitHub Desktop, you can also access your changes from here. Both GitHub Desktop and Visual Studio Code are independently tracking these changes because they're both watching the directory. But I can understand that GitHub Desktop is not going to be for everybody. So I'll just go ahead and commit this. And once again, if I want to view the history, I can always jump over to GitHub Desktop and check out the history from here. But aside from viewing the history in GitHub, we can also view it in VSCode. And there's a couple different ways, and I want to show this off because it feels very hidden. So at the bottom of the Explorer is the timeline. And if we go in here, we can check the timeline for a given file. So I'm in main.c, and I can see that the file was saved, then there was the initial commit, several saves before cleanup from template, and then many saves before this next commit. We can choose this filter to switch between just looking at local history and just looking at the Git history. We can click on any one of these interactions and we can see the diff, and this actually applies to the local history as well. So yes, Visual Studio Code has this local history feature built in, and you don't have to enable it, it's on by default, but I still recommend that you use local repositories when you're working on projects. But there's no reason that you should have to publish the branch until you've decided you're going somewhere with it, and at that point, you're going to have all of the prior history of when you had started working on it. So whenever you start with a project, open up the source control and initialize the repo, or if you're more of a GitHub Desktop fan, add a new repository. You can add a local repository. I always find that it's easiest to create it from right inside VS Code, but of course, whatever you're most comfortable with, whatever you prefer. In this video, I basically just did a few random commits just to show off how to view the diff and how to use the built-in source control. But if you're working on your own projects, try to commit small and commit often. And if you're working on large features that are independent from most of the app, but touch a bunch of different parts, I recommend branching. So that's it. That's how to work on a local repository. Remember, at any time, if you want to, you can go ahead and publish a branch. You can choose whether you want to do a private or a public repository. I'll do private. And you can see it's publishing, uploading the files. Now I can choose this open on GitHub. And we can see here's my private repository. The name is based on what the folder was. And all of my files are here. If I go to commits, we can see that local history that we were doing offline, so we can see that that's preserved. And if I view the repository from GitHub Desktop, we can see that the publish option has been replaced with fetch, so it also knows that we have switched to a repo that is actually being tracked online. That's it for today. Be sure to leave a comment down below if you have any questions. If you think I missed anything, I'm happy to make a follow-up video. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more C programming content. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.